Hi everyone, this is Robert with Cruzbike, and today we're going to be assembling a Cruzbike S40 frame set. This will be the frame only assembly, and after that you'll be able to install the compatible components of your choice. Alright, let's get started. So we'll do an unpack here. You'll find everything is packed nice and cleanly. We have the seat and the pad, the handlebars, we have other elements like the chainstay, the boom and slider assembly here wrapped up nice and clean. Also we have our welcome guide, which we'll cover that a little bit later, parts box, chainstay, and also the main frame and headrest pad. We also have in the box some other spare parts. We have the parts for the front chainstay stock, which comes with the frame set. Make sure all the parts are out of the box before proceeding. Alright, we've laid out all of our parts that were in the box after unwrapping, but let's check what's in the parts box. We have some grip tape which you can use after your own assembly if you'd like. We also have the portion of the fork and bearing and top cap, stem cap, crown race, lower bearing. Make sure you have these set aside. We're going to set these out by the fork. We also have our derailleur hanger. You have a spare, and you also have a spare bolt. So we only need one of these for now. Keep a bolt and one hanger for spare. We're going to set that by the chainstay. We also have our rear seat yoke. This holds the seat back. We also have the remaining parts for the front derailleur stock and bolts. First thing we're going to do here is we're going to get out two of the small button head bolts. We're going to put those with our seat back yoke, so we have those ready to go. We're also going to set aside two more of the bolts and flat washers. These are for the lower part of the seat and the seat extension. The remaining bolt and nuts are going to be used with our derailleur stock. We'll get to that later. That's an option. Only use this if you're going to be doing anything other than a 1x chain. We also have our bottom bracket clamps and also our headset spacers. Alright, that pretty much sums up all of our parts. Now we can get assembling. Alright, I personally recommend some grease to grease the threads of the bolts. You're also going to need a 3mm Allen, a 4mm Allen, an 8mm nut driver, a 2.5mm Allen, and also you will need two 5mm Allen wrenches. Alright, the first thing we're going to focus on is the install of the fork. I have two 5mm Allen wrenches here at the ready as well. Alright, so we're going to take our fork in hand, and we're also going to get our crown race and our lower bearing. Now the crown race is split, so you don't need any tools to install it. You want to make sure the bearing is also installed properly. It has an inside bevel and an outside bevel. The outside bevel goes to the top, so you'll see that here in a second. So we're going to take our fork and we're going to install our crown race. So the crown race is going to go bevel facing upwards, as you see here, and it simply slides down on top of the fork, and make sure it rests all the way down onto the crown. Next, we're going to put a little grease on this crown race. Make sure everything's nice and lubricated there. And then the bearing goes bevel down on the inside, so that way it nests and mates right up against that crown race. Once we do that, we're going to also grease the outside of the bearing. Once we have that ready, then we will simply slide our fork up through the top of the viscoset. Make sure everything is nice and secure. Then we're going to take our top cap for the viscoset, and we're going to take our 4 headset spacers, install our top cap onto the fork. Now note it has a seal on the inside, so it takes a little bit of pressure to get it on. Make sure you try not to destroy the seal on the inside, the O-ring. But once it slides onto the steer tube, it should push right down. Make sure everything is nested nice and tight. And and then install the 4 headset spacers onto the steer tube. All right, once we have the main part of the fork installed, we're going to grab our pivot clamp right here. Make sure the hole is facing up and forward. We'll also have our pivot clamp bolt. It has 3 washers. Very important that 2 washers are located on the sleeve side and 1 on the bolt side. We're also going to need our top cap and our bolt. 6mm bolt with a 5mm Allen head. I'm going to put a little grease on the top cap bolt. Loosen the pivot bolt clamps if needed, and install the pivot bolt clamp. Note that the hole is facing upwards. And we're going to tighten our top cap. Now we're going to set our headset tension by snugging this down until we don't feel any side to side or lateral movement in the fork, and everything turns nice and smooth. Now note, the Viscoset is a dampening headset, so it's going to feel a little tight, but it should feel nice and smooth. That's normal. Now the last thing we need to do is position the top of the pivot clamp in line with the fork. We want to make sure that this is even with the fork. So we're going to tweak it and give it a nice line of sight here, make sure everything's nice and tight, and then we can tighten the 2 bolts on the side of the pivot clamp. Make sure these are nice and snug but not over tight. Once we have that nice and secure, our fork is officially installed completely. Once you have everything nice and tight, give a feel for the fork, give it a little turn, and just kind of make sure everything feels nice and smooth and nothing is binding. It'll feel tight right now, but that Viscoset is going to really help dampen the ride later. All right, now let's install our front chainstay. And take our chainstay. First thing we're going to do is install the derailleur hanger. We're going to use our 2.5mm Allen for the small bolt that holds the derailleur hanger. It simply rests on the inside of the hanger. It only goes on one side, so you can't put it in incorrectly. Once we have that bolt in there, we'll use our 2.5mm Allen to secure the hanger. You want to make sure this is snug, but not too tight. Be very careful not to strip the bolt head. I highly recommend using a flat side of the Allen and not the ball end. It will prevent stripping that out. Now once we have our hanger installed, if you're going to be installing a front derailleur, then you will want to install the front derailleur stock. This is a total option. If you're using a 1x setup, you don't need this. So here we have our bolts and our stock. First thing we want to do is we want to locate the notch and also the little bracket. Notice how there's a flat side and a bevel. The bevel faces down. And then we're going to take this small 3mm bolt and we're going to thread it in. That's going to hold it in there nice and secure. Note the bevel is on the bottom. And we'll use our 3mm Allen to secure this. Make sure it's nice and snug. Now once we have that bracket on, we're going to get the other larger bolt, the 5mm, and the washer. That's going to thread in through the bottom, through the chainstay. We're going to orient our chainstay as you see here. The bevel goes against the side of the chainstay. Now note, this can be a tight fit depending on the tube and the hole. You might need to use a small file in the hole. Hopefully everything fits nice and snug. It should be tight, but once it's in there nice and flat and flush, then we will attach it permanently with our 5mm Allen and the bolt through the bottom. Everything should be nice and secure once that's done. Now we're going to take our pulley wheel. This is for the front derailleur cable. Put the bolt with the Loctite through the sleeve as you see here. And then this pulley wheel installs on the right side of the chainstay stock with a 5mm Allen. That allows for the proper routing of the derailleur cable. Now we're going to take our front through axle and we're going to move the tool. The through axle cannot go through with the tool in place. The through axle tool also has a T25 to use to attach rotors to your hubs. I'm going to add a little grease to the threads. And we're going to put the chainstay over the fork and simply hand tighten our front through axle in. No need to tighten it too tight it now, we're just putting it in for assembly purposes. Alright, let's move on to our boom and slider assembly. We have the pivot clamp here. I'm going to kind of move that to the middle. We're also going to slide the boom and slider together a little bit. Make it a little easier on us. If you need to loosen that, use a 5mm Allen. I'm going to set it right here. We're also going to take our sleeve and bolt for the pivot clamp. Again, note 2 washers go on one side and 1 washer goes on the bolt side. This is very important for proper clamping force on the pivot clamp. Always make sure you grease this particular part to make installation go smoothly. The washers go on the outside. So we're going to slide the sleeve with 2 washers through. And then we're going to add the washer on the outside again and bolt on the other side. The washers space out the sleeve part so it allows for proper clamping force. Now we're going to take our 4 bolts and our chainstay bottom bracket clamps that go around the shell to hold the bottom bracket and stay together. Now for this, I've stood the frame up. We're going to match the front boom to the chainstay. I'm going to put a little bit of grease on the threads for these to make installation go nice and smooth. Use our 4mm Allen and install these bottom bracket chainstay clamps. Now, very important that these are not over tight. We have a separate YouTube video for this. You want there to be a gap top and bottom, which I'll show you here in a moment. For the frame set assembly, there's no need to over tighten these. They only need to be a 1/4 turn or so past snug, and the surfaces should never touch each other. So you don't want to tighten down one side completely tight and then the other. Your clamp will break. So make sure that these are only a 1/4 turn or so past snug and there's an even gap on the top and the bottom of the chainstay clamps. Now we're going to set our frame up. We'll rotate our slider so it's nice and level. Then we can use our 2 5mm Allens to snug down the pivot bolt. Okay, I want to emphasize again here with a close-up how important it is that there be a gap on these chainstay clamps here at the back and at the front. You can see a gap, kind of roughly a credit card thickness or so. This is the proper way to tighten these. The surface should not be touching. Same thing with the handlebar clamps. We're going to undo one side. Now here's a pro tip. If you undo the other clamp almost all the way but don't remove it, you can simply route the handlebar through the clamp, orient them so the drops are facing forward, and then re-tighten down and install the other clamp. Again, making sure there's a gap on the top and bottom. All right, let's install our headrest tubes. If you're going to be using a headrest on your S40, the Perez clamp is pre-installed. the headrest tubes simply slide into the frame. But before we do that, we have to lower the Perez clamp, which we do with a 3mm Allen. So we're going to loosen these bolts, and as you do so, you will notice that the Perez clamp will lower down into the frame. You want to loosen these all the way so that the clamp is resting all the way at the bottom of the hydroform tube. They're pretty long, so it'll be very difficult to remove them too far. So once that's nice and loose and resting all the way down on the frame, the headrest tubes will be able to slide in, maneuver them past the pivot clamp into the frame. Then we can use our 3mm Allen to tighten, pulling the Perez clamp up against the tubes. These bolts do not need to be super tight. Again, it needs to be only snug enough to prevent movement in the headrest. And normally this is a good point where you can start installing components, particularly routing your rear brake cable through the opening on the frame, and then you access the other exit hole through the hole in the seat area of the frame. So for routing your cables, you don't necessarily need to have the seat installed. Let's go over it here though, so when you're at that point, you'll know how to install the seat. You're going to take the 2 flat washers, 2 nuts, and 2 bolts, install the bolts and washers through the seat extension, as you see here. The seat extension is adjustable forward and back. I personally like running it all the way forward. I'm going to simply take the extension with the bolts, run it through the top of the seat, and once we have that there, we will line up those bolts through the seat mounts on the lower part of the frame. And I tilt it forward on purpose to avoid the seat getting stuck on the Velcro. You're going to simply push those through there, and I'm going to hold it up, thread the nuts into the bolts, just a handful of threads, just temporarily. Once that's in place, then we can make sure the seat is nice and even. You can always tell based on the holes, they should be pretty centered over the Perez clamp bolts. And now through the top holes you see here, we're going to install our upper seat yoke, again with the other 2 M5 bolts. Simply get those started in one side, and then install the other side. Now when you go to permanently tighten the seat down, this yoke, tighten it with a 3mm Allen, only until you don't feel movement in the seat back and forth. You don't want to over tighten these. The surfaces of the seat and the yoke will not touch because of the gap with the Velcro. It only needs to be snug enough to prevent movement, so make sure that those are nice and secure but not over tight. For when the time comes, the seat pad simply Velcros on, as you can see here, and the headrest pad simply slides over the headrest tube and then rests inside the pocket at the top. Very easy to install. That of course will be done once your bike is completely finished and cabled with components, here just for demonstration purposes. And there you have it. That's basically the entire S40 frame set assembly. Everything's good to go. Again, you won't want the seat on while you're cabling that back in, but everything is ready to install components at this time. As always, make sure you always check through any documentation that we include in the box. Here we have the headset assembly, similar to what I mentioned in the video, but here it is on paper, so we have that there with the order. And always don't forget to review our Cruzbike Romance Guide. It has a lot of good stuff in it that'll help you along your journey of learning how to ride your cruise bike. Highly recommend reading through this. Nice riding tips in here. As always, we are here to help you, and also our forum is a good source of information, and our other YouTube videos as well. If you have any questions, always feel free to email us at support@cruzbike.com, and thanks for watching.